I'm reviewing today Reign of the Supermen. This is the third part in the Death and Life of Superman trilogy. Kind of. I'll get around to that in a minute, but for now, let's just say it's the third part in the trilogy. So the first part is The Death of Superman, which I've already read and reviewed on this channel. I'll link to it in the description down below. Second part is Funeral for a Friend or World Without a Superman, which again I've already read and reviewed on this channel, and I'll link to it in the description down below. And now we come to the third part, not quite the final part. I'll get to that a little bit later. But I'm going to try to avoid repeating everything I said in the previous two videos. And once again, they are linked in the description down below if you want to check those out. But just very briefly, the Death of Superman was an event that DC Comic Books did in the early 90s. It was also, once the media got a hold of it, a big media event. So there was the Death of Superman, in which Superman was killed by the monster Doomsday. Then there were a couple months where the Superman comics were continuing to be published, but Superman was dead, and so the various subplots filled up the pages instead of Superman himself. And then the next event was the Reign of the Supermen, in which not one but four Supermen came back. And the gimmick was, which one of these is the real Superman? Sorry, which one of these is the real Superman? The media was still covering this story somewhat. So the death of Superman itself had been a really big media story back in its day. And the media kept somewhat tabs on what was happening in the comic books up to the reign of the Superman. At least that's how I remember it. My when I was a kid, I was reading in the newspaper, and they were talking about the reign of the Superman and talking about each one of these and which one was the real Superman. It wasn't a big front page story. It was buried in the back in the entertainment news, but it was still being covered by the media. And this is actually the time that I decided I was going to start collecting comics. I had been intrigued by the whole thing, all the events leading up to it, and the big coverage that this had gotten. But at this point, I was just curious enough to see what was actually happening in the comic pages themselves to actually go ahead and commit my own money, my meager allowance, to trying to buy some of these comics. So some of the comic books in this collection, I actually bought them off the news rack at the time they were published. Not all of them, but some of them. And then the whole thing was collected in the 90s in a big, thick edition called The Return of Superman, which I actually had and which I read multiple times over. Now, this book is a book I got from the school library, although it's in my school library because I suggested that the library order it. This is part of my project to get more graphic novels in our school library to encourage extensive reading. That's somewhat of another story for another day. But when I suggested the school library order this, I was thinking that I got the names mixed up in my head. I was thinking that this was the same volume I grew up with. And then it arrived at the library, and it was just half the size I was expecting it to be. Which is because, I guess according to Wikipedia, somewhere around 2016 or something, they republished these, and they split it into two stories. So the Reign of the Superman is now only half the story. And if you want to read how it concludes, you have to buy The Return of Superman. So instead of a trilogy, it's actually 4 stories now. That's because the third volume, The Return of Superman, has now been split into 2 parts. The Reign of the Superman, which is what I'm reviewing now, and The Return of Superman, which our library doesn't have at present. So Yeah, this is all you're getting from me for today. So a little bit of disappointment once I realized that this was not the big comic book I was expecting, but something just half the size. Um, but the comic book gods taketh away, but they also giveth a little bit, because there are a couple issues in here that were not in the previous edition, which I had not read before, which are the annuals. So Bloodlines annual for Superman Man of Steel. And then over here, sorry, it's coming up, the Bloodlines annual for Superman. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. It's the Superman annual. Bloodlines Outbreak is the story that was running through those annuals. And also, there's the first appearance of each Superman, each of the Supermen, has been added to this edition. If memory serves, in the previous printing, these were part of the World Without Superman edition, the second one. The reason being, this is part of Superman 500, or sorry, I think it's the Adventures of Superman 500, which, because it was the 500th issue, was a larger than normal issue, which contained its own story, but which had at the back of it an addendum, which was the first appearance of each of the 4 Supermen. In the previous editions, the ones that came out in the 1990s, these pages had been included with the rest of the Adventures of Superman 500 in the World Without Superman Funeral for a Friend collection. Now they've been moved over here. Okay, so that's just a brief overview. I'll talk about more of these as we go along. I guess maybe just an overview of what this is, maybe, for anyone who wasn't around in the 90s to remember. So Superman is dead, but now he's coming back to life. But now there are 4 people all claiming to be Superman, and which one is actually the true Superman? That's actually how it was advertised in the media, although once you actually read these comics, you find out that at least 2 of them are not Superman, like not even claiming to be the real Superman. There's the Don't Call Me Superboy character, who is a clone of Superman, or he thinks he's a clone of Superman. I believe his actual origin gets a little bit more complicated, but that's something that happens after these pages. And then John Henry Irons, who's doing a tribute to Superman, but not actually claiming to be Superman. But these 2, the one with the sunglasses and the cyborg, are actually claiming to be Superman. And within the pages of this volume, both of them are being set up as very likely the real Superman. Now, spoiler alert, it's going to turn out that none of them are the real Superman. I'm going to be doing that all through this review, I think, mixing up my Supermen with Superman. Yeah, it's going to turn out that none of them are actually the real Superman, but we don't know that yet. So now Superman at that time had 4 different titles that his adventures occurred in, which were Action Comics, Superman, Superman Man of Steel, and The Adventures of Superman. And I highly suspect that's one reason why there are 4 and not, say, 3 or 5 Supermen in the reign of Superman. One for each of the titles. So we have Superboy here, and then he gets his adventure, and then that one finishes and we go to the next title and we pick up with a next one of the Supermen. If you've read this collection when it came out during the 90s, or if you're familiar with it, you're aware that it's heading towards what I remember as a very epic ending. At least that's how I remember it. Who knows how well it would hold up upon rereading. Where Mongol comes and destroys Coast City, and everybody, the Green is a crossover with the Green Lantern issues, and all four Supermen and the Green Lantern come to fight Mongol, except it turns out one of the Supermen is actually a traitor, and in the midst of the fight, the real Superman comes back, and it's I remember it as a very epic ending. Again, not sure how well that would hold up. But that's not what you get in this issue, because this issue, in this edition, because this edition ends halfway through with Mongol's ship being teased, but that dramatic confrontation is not there. So what you're left with instead is just the various adventures of the four different Supermen, which is fairly episodic and, in my opinion, not terribly compelling reading. Now, who knows? I mean, I loved this when I was younger. When I was, how old was I? 14. I thought this was the greatest thing ever. So who knows how much of this is me just getting old, and who knows how much of this is just because once the ending is lacking, all that's left here is just various episodic stories. Now, to be fair, it was meant to be episodic stories, at least at the time this came out. So before we have the big reveal about which one is the real Superman, we see them all going off on their own separate adventures in various comics. And then once they're established, they do start to cross over with each other. So Superboy and the Man of Steel do share one story in here. There's also, because this is comics, crossovers with other characters. Guy Gardner from the Green Lantern shows up and battles one of the Supermen. There's certainly no, when you're reading it as a collection, there's no forward momentum of the story. It's just a bunch of episodes. Now, the various subplots which were going on in Superman comics at the time, which I gushed over so much when I was reviewing the Funeral for a Friend volume, are all now pushed back to the background. And that's another reason, in my view, why this maybe is a little bit boring. Those weird and wacky characters that had dominated in Funeral for a Friend are mostly gone now. So the Newsboy Legion figures very prominently in the beginning. They're the ones who break Superboy out of Cadmus, but then they're gone for the whole rest of the edition. The Guardian shows up in a few panels, but he's mostly in the background. Lex Luthor is around, but that big, what do I want to say? The big subplot, or the big plot, which was set up in Funeral for a Friend, about Lex Luthor Lex Luthor and Paul Westfield from Canvas, both trying to take control of Metropolis and both trying to outmaneuver each other. That subplot is almost completely gone here, although we do have a scene with Luthor meeting up with Packard, his mole, who he placed in Cadmus. They don't really explore it much within this collection. which is a little bit disappointing, although to be fair, subplots are meant to be sub. So now that we've got Supermen back in the pages of this, the Supermen are going to take over, and the subplots go back to just boiling in the background, which to a certain extent is what makes comics so intriguing, is their ability to keep these subplots boiling in the background for a long time. And if memory serves, the big confrontation between Luthor Corporation and Cadmus and all the characters at Cadmus would come a year later in the battle for Metropolis. So it would come, but they're just going to go back to simmering in the background. And some of the other subplots or plots that were set up in Funeral for a Friend, like Gangbusters, just completely disappears. I want to say we don't hear anything about it again, but this being comic books, you have to be careful when you say that, because you never know. It could be in some special one-shot issue or crossover that I just isn't collected in this edition, and I just don't know about that. I want to make a point of saying that last part because in my review of Funeral for a Friend, I said that the death of Sasha Green, who was killed by Luthor, was a little bit superfluous and was a little bit tipping of her hand too much to show how evil Luthor was, because it never comes back again. But it shows how much I know, because it actually does come back again in the Bloodline storyline, where Sasha Green is now actually resurrected. And I was completely oblivious to this because I never bought this issue when it was on the newsstands at the time. And like I said before, this was the Bloodlines stories were not collected in the 90s edition of The Return of Superman. So, yeah, I was wrong about that. Sasha Green does come back. So her death was not completely superfluous. They did go on to use that for the plot. They were probably counting on doing that the whole time. Yeah, there is, while I'm talking about this, if you want to nitpick something, Luthor's broken leg is not consistent. So this happened in Funeral for a Friend. And this was actually another issue which was not collected in the 1990s, but is in the new edition, 2016 and onwards edition, where it was a Team Luthor one-shot special, where Luthor was trying to be a superhero and he broke his leg in the process. So, they're keeping the comic book continuity. He's got his broken leg here, and he in some of these later issues he's got a broken leg as well. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, over here, and some of them they even got him in a wheelchair. Let me see if I can find those. They're in here somewhere. Yeah. Here we go, with the broken leg. But if you want to complain about continuity gaps, this is something you can cite, because in other appearances in some of these other books, he is not wearing the cast. So here we go. Where is it? Sorry. Yeah, here we go. So here we go, a little bit earlier, and he's standing on his own two legs, and then we flip over a little bit later, and he's got the cast on his leg. For the most part, I think, during this time period, the editors were doing a very remarkable job of keeping continuity and teasing out the subplots, but it is, I guess it makes it all the more noticeable when they miss a beat like that. All right, maybe we should talk about the annuals that are in here. So like I said, there are two annuals which are in here which were not in the 1990s edition. Now, if you're not familiar with comic books, the way the annuals operate, or at least the way the annuals operated in my day, back in the 90s, who knows how much they've changed since then, is that in addition to the monthly issues, there was a bonus issue for every monthly magazine, which was known as an annual, which was bigger than usual, and it wasn't included in your normal subscription. So if you had a subscription to Superman, Man of Steel, which came in your mailbox every month, you still had to go out and buy the annual off the newsstand. It was not part of your subscription. So it was a longer than normal extra issue. And by the 90s, what they had started doing, and what I'm not sure if they still do this, I assume they still do this. They would have one storyline which would run through all the annuals and which would cross over with whatever ongoing storyline was in the comics at that time. So in this year, in 1993, the storyline was Bloodlines. Now, I actually had some Bloodlines annuals. I believe I had the New Titans Bloodline annual at that time. But I never had the Superman annuals. Anyways, the ongoing storyline was there was an alien invasion. The aliens were feeding on humans, but for reasons that are not explained within these pages, I don't know if they're explained elsewhere, some of the humans get killed and some of the humans develop superpowers. Each human developed a different superpower. And this was during the speculator boom of the early 90s, so it was a way to increase a whole bunch of new superheroes who would all be in their first appearance in these issues, because collectors love to get the first appearance of any new hero. So every time you picked up a Bloodlines, one of the annuals in the Bloodlines storyline, you'd be picking up the first appearance of some hero. Most of these heroes went absolutely nowhere. So in the Superman Man of Steel, we've got some sort of shoots out crystal shards superhero. And then in the Superman annual with the cyborg Superman, we have Sasha, the alien. The aliens feeding on Sasha Green's dead corpse brings her back to life. And of course, Luthor is not happy about this because he's the one who killed her, and he doesn't want this anything getting out about this, because at this point, he's still fooling everyone into thinking he's one of the good guys. But it turns out Sasha doesn't have the memories, her old memories. She just absorbs the memories of everybody she touches. That's her superpower. Now, I'm fairly sure the reason that this wasn't included in the Return of Superman volume in the 90s is because you don't really need these stories. They don't really add to the Return of Superman storyline. I mean, they feature the characters, but you could take them out and really not lose much. On the other hand, if you want to be completely utilitarian about it, you don't really need any of this. But it's fun to read. So it's relatively fun to read. It's not the best stories, but it was something from this storyline, which I remember so well from my youth, that I hadn't read before, that I was happy to read and just kind of see how the puzzle pieces fit into this. Because, there are, every time you get a new issue, there are more puzzle pieces that fit into this, as well with the other one. It makes references to the underworld being flooded, some of the underworld characters who had shown up in Funeral for a Friend, etc. So some of the continuity is advanced here. Now there are only 2 annuals in here, even though as I previously said, there were 4 titles, Superman titles running, and I'm assuming that the other 2 annuals must be included in the next edition, the Return of Superman, the 2016 one. So I guess 2 in this edition, and then 2 in the follow-up book. Yeah. I know I'm just going off on tangents and talking about subplots and continuity things and just little things without really talking about the big story here. But like I said, there's not much of a big story yet. It's just a series of episodes, which I think worked fairly well when it was hitting the newsstands back in the day. People liked reading about these new Supermen. People liked wondering which one was going to be the real Superman, even though we already know that 2 of them weren't. But yeah, rereading these without the ending, without the big climatic battle in Coast City, struck me as a little bit anticlimactic, or maybe lacking climax. Some interesting things going on with the subplots, but the basic plot of each issue, I don't know if there was anything to write home about. So I think I'm gonna wrap this video up with that. Yeah, sorry, I don't have any more interesting commentary on this, but that's all that strikes me.